This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, editorial director, and co-founder of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the episode today is Floris, Delée. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine Brewing Industry Guide. This quarterly independent business magazine for the craft beer industry features timely content on everything from brewhouse build-out to legal and marketing challenges for breweries from 100 barrels to 100,000 barrels. Industry peers and professionals share their most valuable insights in the Brewing Industry Guide. Subscribe now at brewingindustryguide.com. So like I said, my guest on the podcast today is Floris, Delée. He is the principal for Kathinka Engineering in Fort Collins, Colorado. His past experience is wide and varied, from a project manager for Steinecker to technical director of New Belgium Brewing, brewmaster for Dogfish Head Brewing, where he appeared on the TV show Brewmasters on the Discovery Channel. Some of you may know him from that. He launched Kathinka in 2004 as an engineering firm consulting to breweries across the country and around the world. Avery, Great Divide, Great Lakes, New Belgium, New Glarus, St. Arnold, Uinta. Most recently, he's been working with Russian River on the build-out of their new brew house. He also, several years ago, launched Kathinka Labs, a division of the company, to help small breweries improve their analytical processes and make better beer. Floris, welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast.
Jamie, thanks for having me. That's exciting.
So you've been around for a while and done quite a bit in your history here in craft beer. We've talked in the past about how much things have changed. For you, what does that pace of change look like? And how does what we're making beer, what brewers are doing to make beer today compare to what it looked like in the mid to late 90s when you started out in the world of brewing?
Wow, that's a big question. When I graduated in '92 from brewing school in Belgium, I had the opportunity to work in breweries in Belgium, and I had a professor. And he told me, he says, "Hey, Floris, there is this kind of thing in the U.S. It's craft beer. That might be something interesting to you." And coincidentally, I had friends who were studying to get PhDs in Fort Collins at Colorado State. And so I went to visit them, and I ran into one of the owners of one of these crazy things, according to my professor, and that was Jeff Liebisch at New Belgium. And then I got to meet Kim, and all I did was go back, ask my parents for $1,000 to buy myself a second ticket, and I've never worked in Belgium since. So it was very different those days.
How many employees did New Belgium have at that time?
I think I was number 6 or number 7, and so it was.
They have what, 800 now?
Yeah, and it's just exciting to see how a brewery from then we had the daily run to Ace to get the parts to keep the brewery going, to now a brewery with some of the most eloquent facilities and beers and such a high watermark of the industry. It's exciting to see, but. Yeah, in those years, a lot has changed. One of the things that I thought was really intimidating, it was in 95 and 96, was that like wave of bad beer. That was really something scary, and everybody
when we talk
owned
about that. You're right. I mean, I started drinking craft beer in about 1995, okay. And I remember that like 1999, 2000 point where it seemed like, from the local brew pub chains where I lived in Florida, hops chain, like folks just started going out of business left and right because beer just wasn't that good. Just didn't resonate with customers, and there was that initial excitement and boost, but then it seemed to kind of the bottom kind of fell out of it at that point.
Yeah, it was I thought a little bit of a crazy time. It was this confluence of two things. I think that. We had brewed enough good beer on the market, so people started to know what good beer was, And I think a lot of people said, wow, that's exciting, let's get in there. And so you had this mix of, we and with we I mean the entire industry. We had educated people that good beer was something worthwhile to have, but then on the other hand, there was this wave of beer that came in that was just not worthwhile to have. And I was teaching a class in Panama and Central America here in January, and I kind of used some words of some of the keynote speakers over the years at the craft brewing conference, where I said, like, hey people, we collectively own the brand craft beer. And in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was that shakeout and the people that really owned the brand craft beer, that really put the investments, the time, who were willing to dump some beer that was not good, I think got rewarded. And I think this is one of the pieces I say most in my classes or in consulting work, is that, like, you as a brewer, doesn't really matter how big you are, but every beer that you put on the market at the end could be a person's first touch of craft beer. And if that is really a bad beer, you actually do yourself a disservice, but a lot of brewers a disservice, actually all of us craft brewers. And it was interesting because in Panama I got a standing ovation over that, which I thought was really cool, because some of the beer there was not good, but other beer was exciting. And the fact that people recognize that, I think, is important. But it's a message I think we have to keep up, and we need to keep talking about it. And that's also why we have Kathinka Labs. Sometimes knowing a number, being able to expose yourself a little bit to data and say, hey, I thought I'm doing this, but that's really what it is. Micro results that are not always as great as you want them to be, but willing to listen to it, willing to read it, and challenging yourself to improve is important.
So, and some folks listening will certainly understand this. You have the historical perspective, but others that are newer to craft beer may not have that full concept of history. We went through that boom phase and that bust phase, but what happened in those early 2000s, a lot of inexpensive brewing equipment ended up out there on the market and allowed some folks to get into the brewing world who otherwise might not have had the capital or the resources to jump into it. And number two, the entire world of craft beer, most of the major brewers decided, hey, let's start sharing information and best practices so that everybody can make better beer. Because if everybody makes better beer, then the entire category, all the ships will rise. And and that was kind of a watershed. I mean, folks look at the craft beer culture and community now, and the way the breweries share information and the way that they speak openly about their processes and what they're doing. And it's rather unique in the world of business, period. I mean, most times folks that are competing in businesses don't share information with each other in the way that craft brewers do. But as a result, we've seen this incredible growth, which is surpassed the kind of growth that most other businesses will see in any kind of category, and that's on the strength of this kind of cultural sharing. And you got a front seat view of all of that as it took off.
I think that fact of sharing, that ability, that I like to use the word, the community, has always been exciting, and I think it's still there. I had a brewers for a project that we're working on in Honduras, and we did a tour. We were at Avery, we were at New Belgium, we were at Odell's Funkworks, and the feedback from the brewers that we were visiting was that mix of motivation, but was also sharing some details. And you're absolutely right. Being in an industry where people are saying, hey, we did this well, we did that bad, and that willing to share, because something that doesn't work is as valid to know as something that does work. And so this comparison is kind of exciting. But the fact that we share, and that's probably why I'm still in the business, because that learning from each other, being able to admit that something is wrong. Sam had always had a great comment after that episode of Brewmasters where we dumped 2 batches. It was the topic that people talked most about after watching Brewmasters, was that we dumped beer. And I had never thought about that, frankly, that was worthy, a piece of information.
Right.
And because people would say, like, well, as a brewer like Dogfish, you guys are so good, why would you dump beer? But actually, every brewer that's honest will say, well, I had to dump that because that ingredient didn't really work, or we made a mistake. And everybody does that. You don't make the same spaghetti every day as good at home either. And but sometimes we do make mistake, and I think it takes some confidence.
There's 2 ways the brewers that tend to deal with that. Number 1 would be dumping beer, and number 2 would be if it's a beer that's simply out of spec to a brand, but still they enjoy the flavors or taste of that, releasing that as a different beer.
Yeah, and I think that's totally okay.
Yeah.
But I think we do need to be honest to ourselves and to each other and say, hey, this beer was really not good,
Sure.
and we're not going to sell it. And that was one of the things at the Brewmaster series we got the most comments about, that we truly dumped beer. And I think that every good brewmaster will have heroic stories over a beer about when they had to dump beer. It doesn't make you a bad brewmaster.
Right.
Dumping beer is a reality. If you have to dump beer every day, then you're a bad businessman. But then there is another problem. But ultimately, we have to be able to be honest.
Well, and I think from a consumer perspective, it's hard to constantly keep in mind that we're dealing with living organisms, yeast, that usually do what we expect them to do, but don't always do what they expect what we want them to do. And that creates variables that are certainly going to change things from time to time. And
absolutely, and think about this: the battle against billions of individuals, in this case yeast cells, is not an easy battle. But what American craft beer has done in the beginning, and it was very prevalent when we talked in the early days to equipment suppliers from Europe, often German companies. They had been building, for example, yeast propagation plants, but only used one strain. But how many brewers are there that only use one strain? The American craft brewers had put the bar pretty high. They use multiple yeast strains, sometimes more than yeast, all in the same facility. So it's a mix of the creativity has pushed the boundaries. On a creative side, but also on a technical side, and it is not always easy to do things. We in the wine industry, the fact that a harvest is different and that you have a vintage is celebrated, and I think that you see that in craft beer now too. We're also starting to say, hey, this year's beer tastes a little bit more like that, and we are celebrating that more. And I think that those are very healthy trends. Being able to say, hey, it's different this time, and that's a good thing. Your comment earlier, sorry to go back there, I always thought was crazy. When I worked for Avery, when they were in the alley, and Adam and Breeze were talking about a new brewery. The first time I was there, they had a tap handle that was called out of spec, and I think my Belgian DNA was pulling at me at that time. But what it was good beer, but it was just not in the spec of some of the brands.
Sure.
And I always thought that was an interesting data point. Good beer that's different is still good beer.
You can mess up and still come up with something that you're happy to drink. And
absolutely.
That's perfectly fine. You raised an interesting point there. And you've talked to me before we were on tape here about one of the biggest issues that you see hitting breweries today is, maybe a little more lax approach to some of that quality. But one of the things you just suggested before we got into that was that this pace of innovation that consumers demand of craft beer, of constantly doing new things, of using new yeast strains, of trying new malt bills and experimenting with new and local ingredients and adding all sorts of fruit or various adjuncts to their beer. That race toward innovation and creating a new experience for craft beer consumers creates unique challenges for the brewers today who don't have the opportunity as often to simply iterate and improve on their process. If you compare, to some, like the large macro brewers, I mean, how many times you make, Budweiser a million times? Well, you're going to get really, really damn good at making Budweiser. Craft brewers don't have that kind of luxury. Thankfully, there are brewers who are, pushing this idea that that hegemony and that corporate kind of monocultural brewing of only doing one thing is not what we should be, not what we should be aspiring to. But still, that race to create that innovation and create those new experiences for drinkers makes it pretty hard on smaller brewers today.
It's a very big challenge. I will never be the one who will say to a brewer, you cannot make that many beers or you cannot be that creative. But we do need to take a deep breath once in a while and say, am I really contributing something by making so many different beers? And on one hand, we do work for a Trappist brewery in Belgium, and one of the abbots there always says to me, Floris, I'm happy that my brewmaster doesn't need to make 10 new beers a quarter. On the other hand, they've been brewing the same beers for the last 200 years. So that's probably one side of the equation. And then you come here to brew pubs with 14, 20, 30 different beers on tap. We do need time to make a good beer, and you do need to do it over a couple times. And I think as an industry, to take a step back and put a little bit more effort in less brands but making them better is probably a fair statement. On the other hand, the industry has been exciting because we've been able in the 90s, in the beginning 2000, to make new beers and challenge ourselves, and so that creativity is pretty cool too. But ultimately, we probably collectively need to make a few less beers and make them better. There no doubt about that.
But that's the challenge, because the thing that has driven interest in craft beer has been that new experience, and so the core craft beer consumer has an adventurous palate. They want to try new things, and brands that and breweries that can't provide that new experience to them, they start to fall by the wayside. And the new, more experimental folks that are offering new experiences.
It's very challenging, and that's why I say I will never say to somebody, hey, you cannot launch a new beer. But when you do something new, is it really interesting and is it challenging? And so I think that it's not because you on the way home saw a new ingredient that you have a new beer. And I think that there is more to creating a new beer, and that mix of the exciting part about craft beer in North America is that constant challenge, is people doing new things, and it's awesome. On the other hand, if that needs to also result in something exciting to drink, and that's difficult, because what's exciting to one person is not exciting to another. But DMS is still DMS, diacetyl is still diacetyl. An infection is still an infection, and so in that regard, I think there is a little bit of a hurdle we collectively need to jump over, and I think most people do, and some people pick that up. There's a brewery in Costa Rica called 35, and if a new brewery opens up in Costa Rica and they make bad beer, but now I mean technically bad, not the brand that you don't like, because who am I to judge for a style that I don't know?
Flawed beer.
But a beer with a mistake, they don't start yelling at them. They invite them to brew a beer with them. And I think that comes back to what you said earlier about the industry. Hey, I'm commenting on somebody else's beer and somebody else is willing to hear it, and there is a brewer that did not know that you need to filter your water, and therefore my mouth tastes like raw phenol because the water is not filtered. He comes over, they brew together, and the new brewer learns a couple things. That's the spirit, and I think that's exciting. And as long as we keep that, I will be part of it.
It's funny you say that. There's some stories in our the latest issue that's at the printer right now that kind of follow up on that same thing, the collaborative culture in craft beer. I don't know that a lot of craft beer consumers understand that the process of breweries brewing collaboration beers with each other is not just about creating an exciting branding and marketing opportunity and something new in the tap room for people to drink. It is as much for those breweries an opportunity to learn from their fellow brewers, to pick their brains, to look at the technical processes that they're using. And in a lot of ways, it's just become an informal oral tradition, word of mouth, handing brewing technique from one brewer to another, and how we do this kind of process.
Absolutely. And that actually has always been the part of a collaboration brew that I like the most. You cannot always come up with something that's per se so new or so cool, but you often learn something, and you learn something what not to do, or you learn something to do. But I was in on this last visit. I'm not a huge New England IPA fan. I love a lot of IPA, so that's either an age thing or I don't really know why I'm not so big on that. But then I got to brew one with Stefano, the brewmaster at Casa Bruja, and it was an incredibly exciting experience. And then when I came back, I had several here, and it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And so I think I was a little bit, maybe use the word judgmental. And here I brewed one with him. It was not something I knew a lot about. I learned a lot, and so ultimately maybe my comments were, or my opinion was a little bit misplaced, not knowing enough about it. And that collaboration brew, I'm still a bigger fan of a West Coast IPA, but I sure gained a lot of respect for a New England IPA.
I think that's an interesting point because, and I think about these in terms of art or music. I might listen to something for the first time or hear something played, and I may not find a way into that. It just may not resonate with me in some way, and that's any art, visual art, audio, music, whatnot. But then from time to time, I have a certain experience, or I experience something with somebody, and it creates a different kind of memory and a different kind of experience that gives me a pathway into that. And then it resonates, So I had a midlife crisis in my late 30s and got into metal. I'd never listened to metal in my entire life, and then all of a sudden, just one friend's like, "Oh, you've got to listen to this," and it hit, and so something that was never something that I was interested in before suddenly became that. But part of that, and I think what you speak to there, is that personal experience with someone in particular, and that kind of sense memory, probably created a ground for you to enjoy that. And in that sense, it was the relationship and the experience of doing something with somebody that changed your perspective on and it even changes, and I think this is an important one for people to understand, it changes how you taste things.
Absolutely.
That our brains are malleable in that kind of way.
Yeah, and I come from a family that not where we made beer, but made other things, gin and coffee, and my grandfather always said it doesn't matter if you order coffee or gin in the morning or coffee or gin in the evening, as long as you're celebrating something with somebody. And that is really what it is. It's your eyes are open to what you're drinking because of the background, the place you are. And it was very telling with this. The beer was called Sandokan. It was the New England IPA from Casa Bruja, and he just said, "Hey, do you want to brew that with me?" And I had a day, and I said absolutely, and it turned into a very exciting experience, because here you had a young brewer that was showing something that I frankly didn't know, and I had formed a little bit of an opinion about, but it was maybe not so meaningful, or it was maybe a little too quick to the turn. I had another experience that I thought was I was I forgot a little bit where it was, but it was also one of the travels, and I'm a fan of Gose, but I don't drink it that often. And I was sitting outside, and there were some people at the hotel that I was staying in, and one of the ladies working there said to me, do you drink a lot of Gose? And I said, no, I don't. And she says, I don't drink beer, but I drink a Gose. For her, she made the difference between beer and Gose. Gose for her was not a beer. And she said, I never drink beer, but these Gose I love. I drink it every day after work. Here you had a person that's not a beer drinker, never really connected goes to beer, but became new to our industry, right? She drinks a beer, although she doesn't call it a beer every day. That's exciting moment. That's a person who's new to the segment beer,
Right.
Who has an opinion that she's not interested in beer because of the big beer brands, but craft beer brings her in because that style talks to her. And that's one of the things that I think will always be exciting for craft beer, that we counter to the comment earlier, we maybe should not make that many brands, but then new brands also bring people in. It's a new experience. It's like going to a restaurant and you always have the same thing, and your mom says, why do you order the same thing every day? Try something new. You have something new and you're ecstatic because it was exciting.
Well, I think that's the other nice piece of that is making assumptions about who it is that drinks craft beer can get brewers in trouble sometimes. I think it's amazing that you were turned on to New England style IPA by a brewery, Casa Brew House in Panama. If that doesn't speak to the
but isn't that beautiful? I think that's what the industry is about, and I think it's also cool to get an appreciation for a goza from a person who says, "I'm not a beer drinker." Those are the experiences that I think will always be a motivator, and that's why I will always be part of craft beer.
So let's switch gears for a little bit. You've talked about the challenges that small breweries face, but tell me a little bit about some of that. From your perspective as somebody who works closely with small breweries, what are some of those big challenges that are top of mind for brewers?
When we make beer, or every person that goes into beer, we enter the industry, or we become brewmasters out of somewhat of a romantic setting. It's exciting to be part of beer, but actually making good beer every day is a battle. It costs money, costs time. You have to learn. You have to invest quite a lot in it. And I think that at the moment, access to market is a very difficult thing, and so there is a lot of money spent on beer. Gets under pressure for more money shifts to how we sell beer than how we make beer, and I think that especially for small breweries that is difficult. The distributor bars want everyday better beer but for a lower price, and you as a brewer have a harder time. And so if you do a couple analysis, or you need to dump a batch of beer that goes against your bottom line, and so there is a challenge. The money that you made in the 90s or early 2000s with beer compared to now is not. That's difficult. Second, we choose to.
But we're seeing, at the same time, we're also watching breweries solve that problem by getting out of the distribution game.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons.
Focusing on those direct sales, selling directly to consumer, and getting higher prices, a lot higher prices in some cases.
And that's great, because they say, hey, you know what? I don't want to play that game. I want to make a good beer. They invest the money beer, and they start selling it through their own tap rooms and all that. And that's I think that's an exciting development. But it doesn't mean that the beer sold through distribution is bad, because a lot of good breweries make there. But if you have to find ways to keep and maintain the balance, that you can invest enough in your beer that you can buy a floor malts that are floor malted that cost a little bit more but are exciting. I was at a beer dinner with 3-4 with Lindsay, and there was a beer that was like so rich and beautiful, and I forgot the name now. And afterwards I went to her and I said, like, wow, I taste clove and cinnamon, and it's almost like a Christmas beer. And I said, what did you all use? And she says, I just used a floor malt from Troubadour. And I was like, wow, that ingredient then had so much more depth. But a floor malt, a barley that's floor malted, is a more expensive malt. So these trade-offs need to be made, and but at the end of the day, you also need to make a buck, because if you don't make a buck, you cannot pay your people to have good people. You need to reward them fairly for what they deserve. You need to have money to do some analysis of your beer, you do need to allow yourself to go to a school, or to a seminar, whatever you do. I at the end is what works for you and what are the standards that you create, and that's why I say maybe make 8 instead of 14 beers, but make them really well, and see where you can contribute. And I think that
it is
a little bit of
yeah.
What is the word here? Self-critique, maybe not. That sounds negative, but a little a form of evaluation, or maybe get 4 or 5 of your friends around the table that you know whose opinion you trust, and maybe they saying, hey, that session IPA is not a bad beer, but is it really exciting? But these 2 others are really cool that you brew. Why not put a little bit more effort in there? And if we have less brands on the shelf in the liquor store, but they all taste better, don't we achieve more?
It's true, but I also think, in some ways people's buying habits are dramatically changing in a way that retail can't keep up with. And part of that is the way that styles are changing. When you have these, New England style IPAs that really depend on bright, punchy hop flavors, those beers don't last very long, and they just don't do as well in that kind of retail environment because they just don't maintain that kind of pop and punch to them. And so those tends to be beers that have to be sold, directly to a consumer from a tap room. But as you say, the price that we now pay for craft beer from a consumer perspective may seem crazy to spend $16 or $18 on a 4-pack of 16-ounce cans. But when you do that, you can afford better quality hops. You can afford more expensive hops. Some of the breweries today, they're doing 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 plus pounds of hops per barrel. If you were to try to sell a keg of that at a current retail price, like no bar can even pay you for that.
Absolutely.
Because, I was thinking about that the other day, a brewery was putting out 10 pounds of hops per barrel. And if you consider they're probably paying $15 per pound for those hops, well, that's $150 in hops just per barrel. If you sell a half barrel keg, $75 of that keg is just the hops and doesn't go to pay anybody else. And so if you start looking at the economy, it gets a little nuts. If you needed to sell that keg, because a half barrel keg of IPA out there on the market, a bar might pay, $180, $200 for it on the high end.
But that
doesn't leave a lot of room.
But that could be one of the beers in your tap room. That could be something that's unique in your tap room, but therefore that beer doesn't need to be in a can. Maybe that can be something different. So we don't need to offer everything the same way.
Right.
And that's why I think there will never be an end to the creativity in the craft brewing industry. We've unleashed a beast, and it's running at full speed. And the future will be super exciting, but things are different. Nobody thought that it made sense to use cans. Oscar Blue started making cans, and frankly, a hoppy beer in a can is fantastic. And so I think that as long as we don't put rules on each other, what you can and cannot do, and let people experiment, but it's not because you experiment or that you do something new that it's good. And
sure.
There we need to be honest to each other and share and say, hey, that's a great project, but did you really do something new, or is that exciting? And if we judge a little bit less and we help each other a little bit more, we will make more and better beer.
There's the other interesting piece of this that history will tell us that all trends in beer, in particular, are cyclical. That we're riding one trend, but if I look at the pace of change within craft beer, even over the last 4 years, I every now and then go back to our first issue where we covered IPAs back in, and we put that issue together in late 2013, early 2014. 12 of the beers that we reviewed in that issue don't exist anymore.
That's crazy.
That's almost a quarter of them. Don't exist. The brewers don't even brew them anymore. And that is how fast breweries are creating brands, destroying brands, refreshing brands. In some cases, it's Stone IPA is now Stone IPA 2.0, and in other cases, Avery has just killed off a bunch of their IPAs, and we're going to launch new products to replace them. And that is this cycle that we're in. Even IPA wasn't 10 years ago wasn't what it is now, And we'll see how long this latest phase of IPA driven by hazy IPA actually lasts. We're starting to see with every trend a counter trend, and now lagers are growing in popularity even among craft brewers and craft beer drinkers, which I can assume that it, as with most cultural trends, becomes a reaction to some of the excesses on the other side of the market.
Yeah, and the pendulum swings. I've been traveling with American craft brewers to Germany for, 15, 20 years now. And I was with a pretty respected brewmaster a couple of weeks ago in Germany, and we were having a beer. And we had, it was a Helles from a brewery, and we looked at each other and we said, wow, that's an incredible beer. That beer is fantastic. And so we drank the beer and we ordered a second one. And I've had that beer with craft brewers over the last 10 years, but I've had the same beer with brewers and say, wow, this is a boring beer. And thank God in North America, we do this and that and the endless stories. At the end, it is how good is a beer and does it make you thick? And that's one of the pieces that I always say to breweries when we're helping them. Have an interesting portfolio, make that portfolio those 8, 10, whatever, how many beers it is, make them all good. And don't try to say that women need to drink this. Guys over 40 need to drink that. Let people choose. And if you make 14 interesting beers, you've done your job. And they are worthwhile, and all 14 are a worthy choice for me as a consumer, then you've done a great job. And you work on a 15th one while you take one off. But the cycle, we almost all need like a breathing apparatus to survive the speed of new beers, because it's not possible.
That's an interesting one. From a consumer standpoint, what do you think consumers should know about a beer, that when they walk into breweries, what do you think is the biggest piece of knowledge in that consumer mind that might be missing right now, or might need a little bit of fostering and growth?
If you don't know what diacetyl is as a consumer, and you have a beer and it has diacetyl in it, then there's nothing you can comment on that. So I think that as brewers collectively, we do need to keep educating beer drinkers.
Flaw, I mean, brewers consider diacetyl a flaw, but if a consumer isn't trained to think that that's a flaw, is it really that bad?
That's the ultimate question when we do tasting classes and we say in most beers this is a flaw, but in these two beers it's considered not a flaw. What are we really saying? I think that's a very good point. My norm always is a little bit: is a beer drinkable? Is it enjoyable? Does a person want to order a second one of it? If you are a person and you love diacetyl in beer, then I'm not sure I have a point by saying, hey, that beer is diacetyl, you cannot have it.
Or if your just palate is blind to that.
Or your palate is blind. Absolutely. An experience that I have often, you're drinking with some consumers in a bar, and you have a beer, and somebody drinks one and they said, like, I can only have one of this. Like they order a beer, very exciting, but they cannot really finish their glass. Then I think maybe that beer, there is something that beer misses. And so
whether they can articulate it or not.
Yeah, exactly. If they can articulate it or not, it doesn't really matter then. But you as a brewer need to be able to articulate why a person cannot drink more than one beer of that beer from you. And I started at brewing for Moortse in Belgium 100 years ago, and the brewmaster there, I remember him as a young kid working there. Everything the guy said I thought was cool, but not everything I do remember. But the one thing he said, Floris, if you are not interested to have a second one of the beer you just had, then there was something wrong regardless. And I still have always kind of carried that with me. If you cannot get to drink a second beer of what you just had, then you as a brewer have to be willing to look at, like, hey, is it a crazy recipe? Did I not make it right? But ultimately the point, what you bring up, is because a consumer asks for it. Is it therefore okay? That's a difficult one. I would like that think that we have some more values. And to me, knowing that a brewery is very sustainable and pays their people a truly living wage, although I don't taste that in the beer, hey, this brewer was paid a fair wage, it's the setting and the value. And to me, that is exciting, knowing that a certain brewery does research in beer and contributes to the bigger brewing community. That probably makes me taste their beer better, or me liking their beer more. And but do I taste that? No, I don't.
That's a good point. And I wonder, how many consumers kind of take look at that brewery's position in the world of beer as a whole, and where they influence and consider.
Probably not many. You and I do,
yeah.
and the brewers we hang out with. One thing that I thought was interesting, I was talking to some brewers, and afterwards I thought, actually, my entire life I drink brewery fresh beer that most of the time I even don't pay for, because people give it to me, and so we're.
Now you're bragging.
no, but I think about it. You too.
Sure.
You always drink very fresh beer. The beers that people want me to try are fresh beers in a brewery, and so is our experience totally the same as people that buy beer in liquor stores, go to tap rooms and all that? No, it's not. And so the more we can
and that goes
put
for,
effort
that goes
in
for
shelf
everybody
life.
who's a brewer, right?
Yeah, for all of it. So when you have a conversation about shelf life, don't forget that the majority of the people who drink your beer are not privileged like we are, and be honest about that. And so the effort to reduce the dissolved oxygen, or the extra X $1,000 you put in a better filler, you do something for that guy that can only buy your six-pack in the liquor store. And so we those investments, if it's time or dollars or trying to improve a process, those are very worthy. And that is one of the things I always try to point out. It's not because you and I don't see the immediate consequence, but maybe a lot of your drinkers will see, and that's exciting.
That's true. And I do every now and then get out there in other parts of the country and do buy beer out of retail environments, just to see what folks get subjected to. And I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I've found 2-year-old IPAs on the shelves in Florida when visiting my parents on vacation. I mean, it's just incredible the way that you find old warm stored beer sitting out there, and not everyone takes the same kind of approach that the top end of craft beer does, in making sure that it's kept fresh, that it's all in code, that it's all sold properly, and then even cared for in the chain of command. That I've bought beer out of coolers that was less than a month old, and it was still oxidized, Mm-hmm. And so who knows how that was cared for by the distributor? Did it sit outside in an unair conditioned, warehouse?
But when we say that we as brewers take a responsibility, have a responsibility towards craft beer, then I think we should extend that. It's not just brewers; it's us distributors, it's us bar owners, it's us beverage managers in restaurants. Is all of us, but that responsibility is effort. We have to put effort in it, and I'll correct myself. I do buy a beer too, but I don't do it very often. But I do it when I'm at places to try beers that I don't know. And a beer that I thought was always quite different. This is when I worked at Dogfish, I was a big fan of 90 Minute. I thought we brewed that. We got that to be an incredibly exciting beer. And then you were at the West Coast, and then you had a 90 Minute. That was not the same beer, although we would wanted it to be. We put a lot of effort for it to be. And I think that the more as a group we can do to make that better, but ultimately we are not selling a technical liquid with a certain set of parameters. We create something to celebrate things, to be around. I was with some of the clients in your bar who were here in Fort Collins, the people from Honduras.
We don't own it anymore.
You don't?
No, we sold the bar to our minority partners.
Oh, okay, good. Well, we
year.
were still there.
It's a great bar, Tap and Handle in Fort Collins, Colorado. Yeah.
And
our office is right behind it.
Okay, well, we should have come then with the beer into your office, but we tasted some beers and we had a fantastic evening. And I think that at the end, we need to put a lot of effort in the beers to make them good, but it also needs to be fun. And if we can keep the fun in beer and help each other to do that well, that's as important as reducing the diacetyl level.
That's a good point. To step back to something you said earlier about brewers and those that work in breweries developing their own palates, something that I've talked about to some length, especially in our brewery accelerator events that we run, is this concept of tunnel vision among brewers that in some of my experience, especially with larger brewers, but brewers really across all the sizes, just like you and I drink a lot of fresh beer that brewers give us, most folks that work for breweries taste that brewery's beer. Breweries have great programs to share, give their own staff free beer from their brewery, and it's a nice perk. Some of them give them quite a bit of free beer, and as a result, a lot of folks that work for breweries end up tasting mostly and drinking mostly their own brewery's beer. And that, in some ways, creates almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that creates a house palate, and it creates an idea of what is good and what is standard, based on the beer that brewery itself brews, and not necessarily, it's not as outward-looking and looking at it from a perspective of a consumer who is not as loyal to that one brewery that's drinking a lot of different things and whose own palate may be evolving more rapidly because they're experiencing beer from other breweries.
Exposing yourself to new things, being innovative is a challenge. It's not something just in beer. Being open-minded, trying new things, and the point you make is a very good one. That's like a brewery where only the brewmaster can say if the beer is good, who only drinks his own beer. So after a while, what is he saying? With the free beer in breweries, I've actually always liked the perk of getting free beer. So
I'm not saying it's wrong.
I'm
just saying that folks that work for breweries maybe want to trade their own beer with other breweries.
It's absolutely true. I think that you need to be willing to taste your beer compared to others. It's also okay to have an opinion and say, like what I mentioned earlier, I was not big in, and I'm still not big in New England IPA, but I had a great experience with it. You need to, the horses have these little plates to keep them going straight. One of the, around their eyes, blinders, how do you call it?
Sure.
And so the horse keeps running forward. One of the exciting thing about craft beer in the 90s was we didn't have blinders. We went all over in every direction, sometimes wrong, but we went in every direction. And I think that my biggest advice to any brewer, assistant brewer, people that works in a brewery is like, be open-minded, expose yourself to other things, or allow yourself to be surprised. The conversation where the lady was telling me that Goza was not a beer, but it was but how great Goza was, I think was meaningful. The brewing a beer with another brewer, the collaboration of a style that you don't know a lot about, awesome. Having somebody talk about a new ingredient, like the 3-4 dinner, the floor malt, really. So I think if we don't fall in the trap to start putting to put what we do in a box or to limit what we can think is important. And that's one of the things why I actually lately have liked being in Central and South America for some projects is they eat different there. They have different things that they get excited about, and I think an open-mindedness, and if we as a as an industry can keep looking at each other and still allow others to say, hey, why don't you never do that? I had a beer, what is it, from Odell's Rupture.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady that was giving the tour was telling me how they were using the hop. I thought it was super cool. I didn't know anything about it. I'd been drinking Odell's from 93 when I moved here. But here's a brewery that on one hand you think you know everything about, and then you get surprised, and it's exciting. And I think that we as an industry, there is some kind of a resizing. How big are the big guys? How small are the small guys? But there is no reason why a brewery that you on one hand think you know everything about cannot surprise you, and they did.
So you just mentioned breweries in Central and South America kind of helping rekindle some excitement and interest in craft beer because they're doing new and different things. Also, you've mentioned that keeping it fun is pretty important, and the culture of craft beer in Central and South America seems to be a little closer to what it looked like in the United States 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, where there was this unbridled enthusiasm just for craft beer, period. But what is it in particular about the cultures in Central and South America that make it so exciting and make what they're doing with beer, and what is it that you're seeing them do that is novel, interesting, or adding something to the world of craft beer in general?
It's a great question. I was at a beer festival in January, and I was at this festival. And I realized after that nobody asked me that they what the IBUs were for a beer. Like there was no almost like nerdy geeky question the entire thing, but it was an event. People seemed to just have fun. It was less about the technicality of the beers. Hey, do you taste the cherries? What about what do you think is the alcohol? I mean, there was none of that. It was like.
Which is a funny thing for you to say because it's kind of your job to.
Oh yeah, totally. It is, and there is room to have that conversation. But it was like next to the Panama Canal. It was this evening. It was beautiful weather, and it was like a bunch of young people, and they were talking about the World Cup that Belgium was going to play Panama. They were talking about. Not that people didn't say anything about beer. People would say this is fun. This would taste. But there was a spontaneity, or how do you pronounce that in English?
Sure.
And that was very, very refreshing. There was also an element of ignorance that was exciting, and it reminded me you didn't need to know anything about beer to have a good time at that festival. And that's what I mean with the fun. Somehow that was possible. What I think is exciting about Central and South America is people there are a little bit where we were here in the late 80s and early 90s, and they're saying, hey, let's do something new. They're inherently happy people, and they'd like to celebrate and turn the salsa up a little bit and have it with a good beer. So I think it's that joie vive, that element of life. Hey, let's have a good time, and maybe don't take it too serious. And so on one hand, to your point, I am talking about making the beers better and all that. And so that is a serious task. But maybe sometimes when we're done work, we need to lean back and have a few beers and enjoy them.
Well, if there's any takeaway, I am getting this idea that more brewers need to have fun, and that fun should be as big a component in this. But the question, hits me like, how do you make that fun? And maybe, and this is just a point for us to talk about, is brewers, are brewers in America sharing too much information on a technical side with consumers in an attempt to give them an entry into the beer, listing things, everything from titratable acidity levels in their sour beer to IBU levels in their hoppy beers to pounds per barrel of fruit added or pounds per barrel of coconut, or is there something culturally about our attachment to data and numbers and the perceived realness of that? Is that taking away from, say, the gestalt of some of these beers themselves and that experience that the brewers want to provide for customers.
Yeah, in general, I love the transparency element. I think it's very cool when a brewer says, "This is what I have here." I think it shows an honesty. And one of the things when we build breweries or we help people build breweries, we always try to really celebrate that openness. You see the lab, you see what's happening. We're not trying to hide anything. So to me, that's an awesome value that craft beer has. But how often have you bought a bottle of beer because the titratable acidity number was 2? You never,
right?
You've never done that. So we have a tendency,
or say like, I could know the titratable acidity number, and yet if I don't know, what the finishing gravity is, does it even matter? Because those two things have significant impacts on each other in the way that they present in flavor.
That's I think that we as brewers, we do need to know the numbers and we need to do things with it. And I think that some of our consumers like the numbers too, and that is awesome. But the majority of our consumers don't care. They want that it's a good,
sure.
that it's a good beer. We're good a little bit undefined. And so I think it's exciting that we share a lot of the numbers. I think it also proves a certain artisanalness, something that we know our processes. I think it's exciting. But there's also an element of it where it doesn't matter. I love my Audi, but I could not quote you the 140 parameters why an Audi drives well. But there are people that will buy the Audi over the 140 parameters that the Audi has. I think we to some point share a little bit too much, but I think that information should be available. Maybe it doesn't need to be all on the label, but I would be cool. Hey, if you want to know all these details about our beer, come to our website or ask somebody or something. I don't think it needs to be a table stake to do that. For me, we haven't really talked about that, but I like a beer that's balanced. I like something where I'm intrigued, where I say, wow, this is really, really a rich experience. What is that? And I start to play in my mind, well, is that a flavor from the yeast, or did they add something, or that? But at the end, I want the experience to be exciting. The beer I was talking about from 3-4 at the beer dinner, that was really exciting. But I couldn't figure out what was exciting. But I was thinking about that. I think that is something we want to create on a big level. And if that was I think that's exciting when people start saying, hey, this beer is really good, I want to have another one of it. Maybe they don't need to exactly know why it is. We as brewers want to know why people are excited about it, but we share too much. And I think that's absolutely true on the micro level. But I won't shy away from my comment earlier that I like to know when, and I'm not sure how many consumers really want to know, for example, when a brewery takes their environmental responsibility serious. I think that's
sure.
An important thing, that they take care of the people that work for them.
Well, yeah, and those cultural concerns are certainly growing in importance to consumers. That whether it's how they treat the environment, how they treat their staff, how they treat the waste product, because brewing beer creates a lot of waste product. Mm-hmm. All of these things impact all of us around us. On another subject, before we wrap up here, you've worked for a lot of brewers and a lot of breweries from Europe to the United States and now Central and South America. What are the most interesting things you've learned from master brewers that you've worked for and with?
Wow, that's a good question. I have really enjoyed some of the people. They often are very, very different. I still remember one time driving in the car from Delaware, from Milton with Sam. And he had
Sam Calagione of Dogfish Head.
And he had written a poem, and he says, Floris, you need to drive. I need to read this poem to you. And so we were driving, and he read this poem, and he says, that's the beer that I want to make. There was no ingredient in it. There was I thought that was a beautiful moment. That was really fun. There is always, and that's why I think your comment earlier that we collaborate not so much because we produce something for the consumer, although that's an important thing. But there are so many cool things to learn from each other, and like when the poem thing was very good. I also really liked the moment when Kim said that we all own the brand craft beer. Thought that was kind of a great moment. At the end, it's the individuals. I think that's the thing that I like the most. But we have a media. We work through something that's very exciting. I mean, if we were making plastic bags, can you have those exciting conversations in making plastic bags? Or there's so many frivolous things that are pre-produced, but we're making beer, something that people enjoy, and so there's so many little stories of experiences. The abbot of the Trappist Brewery I was talking about earlier, he wants to have the bi-yearly conversation while we were boots and we walked through the stables where the cows are. He says that's the best setting to talk about a beer, to walk through a stable with 150 cows. I think that's that clearly
with beer in hand,
with a beer in your hand, and so I think that's awesome. I would have not really thought about that, but it's these things that I also think that what I really liked and why I think I will never do anything else is people sometimes have these comments and these ideas where you really have to take a step back, and so it's impossible to answer what's the best beer that you had, but what is really great is to remember all these moments where you have a beer with somebody, and it's that setting, it's that environment, it's that moment that I think is so good. But there's so many enjoyable moments. I also remember being at trade shows in Germany where right in the beginning when craft beer was nothing yet on a global stage, but was already becoming important, and we were at the booth of an important supplier, and a guy comes to me and to me and the people I was with and says, like, here, if you guys want to have a sausage, they are for free, no problem, but stand at the side because we want to do business here. And think about it, that supplier has sold many brew houses since then to craft beer, but the change that has been created is phenomenal, and I'm kind of proud to have been part of it, and I'm proud for the newer generations to bring new ideas, and that if we collectively can stay open-minded, that's probably maybe my biggest fear, and I hope that we honor that the open mindedness we received when we started in the beginning, that we reciprocate that to the new people that are starting now, and that's ultimately why I say we cannot say to somebody you cannot make that many beers, or if you want to put roadkill in your beer, go for it.
Oh goodness, let's not do that. But that I like that idea. You know, if you look at the history of craft beer in the United States, it for a long time was driven by and inspired by European traditions, and so European and English, and so American brewers are
they're different now.
We're making Belgian beers, they're making German beers, they're making English beers, and that was what sparked the craft beer craze in the United States, an interest and desire to have beers that are in different styles than the large American breweries provided to American consumers. But now American brewers have taken this to entirely different place. And, American styles of IPA, West Coast IPA, New England style IPAs are now being exported around the world. Brewers around the world are now making those. There are American style brewers in Europe now who are taking inspiration back from brewers in the United States.
That's a super moment. I think I've always said that I stood with one, that I was straddling the ocean, that I stood with one leg in Europe because that's where I'm from, that's where I learned, where I studied brewing, my first job. But on the other hand, I'm so thankful that I that I got a job here in the 90s at New Belgium, because with my other leg I stand in North America with all the traditions and the energy. If that cross pollination can go in any way, in any direction, the challenge will be is that how is there a place for all of us at whatever size we are? And so there is going to be a kind of a reconnection. Why is a beer brewed in Belgium shipped over and imported here? How does that compare with great beers made here? What do we need to import from there? I think it's great if I want to try a beer from there. That's awesome. But there is going to be a resizing, a reconnecting, because there was a lot of beer imported here because there was not a lot of great beer. Now there is a lot of great beer, and how do we go? But the fact that visiting in Belgium, I was at a small brewery, and the people there had grew up in Belgium just like I did, with a pretty rich palette of different beers, and all they wanted to talk was, because I work in North America, about American IPAs. I thought it was kind of a cool moment. That layer is there. That in Italy you can buy craft beer more expensive than some good wine. Why? That's crazy, because there's a lot of good Italian wine.
Sure.
But the fact that we offer it, that it's possible, that it's not, you don't drink in Italy just Birra Pironi because it's the only beer there is, but I have a choice. I can drink in Belgium now a great IPA. I mean, Moordgat makes several super exciting beers there. The fact that we can learn from each other ultimately is the super value.
And I can see over the next 10 or 20 years that that sharing and that kind of dissemination is going to get even more broad as breweries in Central and South America add their own flavor to that equation.
Absolutely.
As breweries in Southeast Asia, add their own input, and then more brewers in the United States take and give, and that two-way street of inspiration continues forward.
I was talking to Ricardo, the guy that organizes the Copa in Chile, and I said, what is really a style from here? Like, what's a brewing tradition from here? And he looked at me and he says, that's a good question. There have to be things that will come from there. And it's okay to not know what they are. As long as you and I here on one of our trips, maybe we can go together and we can taste a few, and there is something new. Everybody has the ability to create something new, and that's exciting. I will always point out when it has DMS, but maybe in some beers that's okay.
Well, we'll keep our eyes open, and we'll keep our palates open to those new experiences as those grow and change. Floris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. If people want to learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Well, we have, you just go to our website, kathinkalabs.com, I think it is.
Okay.
And I should know this. You in your intro, you were really good at pointing that out. No, we have a website. We have a blog. I think that it's www.kathinkalabs.com, I believe it is. And I think that what did I want to say? It was exciting to share some of these experiences with you, and thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate your insight and your knowledge and experience in the industry. Thank you, Floris. This episode of the podcast has been brought to you by the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine Brewing Industry Guide. This quarterly independent business magazine for the craft beer industry features timely content on everything from brewhouse build-out to legal and marketing challenges for breweries from 100 barrels to 100,000 barrels. Industry peers and professionals share their most valuable insights in the Brewing Industry Guide. Subscribe now at brewingindustryguide.com. Thanks, Floris. We'll talk soon. Tune in next week for a new episode.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.